All right, we are recording. You'd think by now I would think to look up which episode we're on. I think it's 36, but I never know for sure, and I should come prepared, don't you think? But I think it's episode 36. We're going to be starting on page 55 tonight, the riverbed of mercy. So you can navigate to that page in your hardbacks. If you're on a Kindle or something, hang in there. Oh yeah, that by the way, who is it? Ah, why can't I think of her name? Anyway, she's in Sri Lanka right now. Who am I thinking of?
Tanya.
Tanya, thank you. I just wouldn't come. Tanya, she's in Sri Lanka for a destination wedding. How cool is that? So we're going to have to hear about all about that when she gets back. But that's where she is. So it's pretty exotic. We've got other friends right now who are in Vienna on a destination. What is it with these destination weddings? Come on, can't you just get married in the local church? I've been a pastor for 22 years. You know, the one wedding I have never performed is in a church. I've never performed a wedding in a church with pews and a bride side and a groom side. I mean, I've done it on balconies and beaches and gazebos and everything you can think of, a hotel room, but never a church. Isn't that kind of strange? Destination weddings. All right. You got that for free because it's totally off topic, has nothing to do with anything. For those of you who are watching the recordings, we apologize for these little rabbit trails that we take occasionally. And if you are watching by remote control and you'd like to join us, just look in the comments. All the links and instructions are there. We would love to have you come and be with us live. Okay, page 55. Before we get there, is there anything left over from last week that we didn't hit? I know we kind of breezed through the last couple of paragraphs pretty quickly. I don't know that they give us a whole bunch of new information. They're kind of developing what we went through. But if there's anything that you've been thinking about, now's the time. I am honoring the silence. See, I can do that. All right. Looks like we are all caught up. Page 55, Riverbed of Mercy. There's a place in you that is not touched by coming and going, by up or down, by for or against, by totally right or totally wrong. It is patient with both goodness and evil, exactly as God seemingly is. It does not rush to judgment or demand closure right now. Rather, it stands vigilant and patient in the tragic gap that almost every moment offers. Could this be the essence of faith? God is a riverbed of mercy that underlies all the ephemeral flotsam and jetsam of your life. This riverbed is vast, silent, restful, and resourceful. It receives and also releases all the comings and goings. It is awareness itself, as opposed to judgment or thinking. It refuses to be pulled into the emotional and mental tugs of war that form most of human life. To look out from this untouchable silence is to live from your soul space, where God dwells most generously. St. Teresa of Avila says, I myself can come up with nothing as magnificent as the beauty and amplitude of a soul. The fact that the soul is made in God's image means that it is very difficult for us to understand its sublime dignity and loveliness. Far too many humans suffer from a negative self-image when an entirely positive one has been given to them for free. All right. Any initial thoughts or reactions or anything jump out at you? Nah, nothing today, huh? All right. As we've been mentioning the last few times, as we moved into chapter 2 here, chapter 1 was kind of the what of contemplative experience, and this is more of the how of contemplative experience. He's getting into how we can move into that space as opposed to just kind of defining it. All right, well, let's go back to page 55 and let's start over and let's kind of break things down a little bit because there's a lot here. So he says there's a place in you that is not touched by coming and going or up or down or for or against or totally right or totally wrong, that is patient with goodness and evil exactly as God seemingly is. Doesn't rush to judgment or demand closure. Rather, it stands vigilant and patient in the tragic gap that almost every moment offers. And then he asks if this could be the essence of faith. So one of the analogies that I like to use when we talk about contemplation is if you're at a storm, in a storm at sea, all right, and you're getting tossed around by 20-foot waves and the boat's, going up and down and the wind's blowing and howling and you're wondering if you're going to survive. Well, if you were to go down 10 meters, you'd still be, moving back and forth and up and down by all the motion on the surface. You go down another 10 meters and there's this kind of circular motion. You go down another 10 meters and you'll be perfectly still. That's kind of what we're doing when we move into contemplation. At the surface, we're just in the midst of all that the egoic mind is throwing at us constantly. The constant barrage of information, of chatter and self-talk and judgment and comparing and contrasting and thinking forward and contingencies and all the stuff that's going on. But as we start to move further down, stepping away from that egoic consciousness, it gets smoother and smoother and calmer and calmer and quieter until we get to a place that he's talking about here that's not touched by coming and going up or down, for or against, right or wrong. And it's an amazing sort of phenomenon when you can do that. There was a movie about a big league pitcher, and when he would stand on the mound and the crowd is roaring and the pressure is on, he would internally say, clear the mechanism, clear the mechanism. And you just hear the crowd go silent. And then everything would start to go out of focus from the edges of the frame until there was just this, the only focus was a clear tunnel between him and the catcher's mitt. And he kind of went into that kind of space. And that was another great visual of what we're talking about. When we can step away from all that sensory input, and step away from everything that is being channeled by our brains and just move into that quiet space. And the key is that it's always there. No matter what we're going through on the surface, no matter what we're going through in life, no matter what our minds are throwing at us, no matter what our unconscious is bringing up through the emotions, that we're not even aware of, but that is creating more of that storm at sea, that quiet space is always available. Some traditions call it the watcher. We've talked about that before. It's the part of us that watches all the shenanigans that go on in the egoic mind and is aware of it, but is not part of it. And then we can start to see how our egoic minds are tools that we can use as long as we don't identify with them. And so to get better and better at the art, at the practice, I suppose, of contemplative prayer and mindfulness training, whatever you want to call it, but to be able to step away from that is so incredibly important. And it feels completely different. All of the moral attitudes that we have, right and wrong, good and evil, they quiet down as well into a singular space. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means that you aren't using them to judge everything and every moment and every person. And you can just move into a quiet place. What I wanted to do right now is what this reminded me of, especially when he talks about, not totally right or wrong. There is a place in you. Remember how Rumi said there is a field?
Mm-hmm.
That is immediately, I want to read that poem. And for those of you who have been coming on Sundays, every once in a while, I'll read this poem. It's called The Great Wagon. If you're not familiar with Rumi, he is a 13th century, he was a contemporary of actually Francis of Assisi. He was I think he would have been in his early 20s when Francis died. But they're both 12th and 13th century figures. But he was born in what now is Afghanistan, and he was Persian and part of the Persian Empire at the time. And most of his poetry is written in Persian, some of it's in Arabic. But he is considered, right now, believe it or not, he is the best-selling poet in the United States. Who knew, right? But Rumi is. And he's become world-renowned, and he's just a wonderful Sufi mystic and also a poet extraordinaire. So let's take a look at this.
Dave,
Because I want you to see. I'm sorry, was there someone asking a question?
Dave, what was it called again?
A Great Wagon is the name of the poem. Can you see it there?
Yep.
Is it? Let me.
It's awfully small. That's better.
I'll make it some bigger. There we go.
That's
Okay.
good.
You can see down at the bottom there, Bill, A Great Wagon.
Yep.
Now, as we read through this, just be thinking about what we were just talking about, what Rohr has just said, and see how this kind of clicks, because he's describing the sensation and the experience of moving down into this space. He writes, when I see your face, the stones start spinning. You appear, all studying wanders. I lose my place. Water turns pearly. Fire dies down and doesn't destroy. In your presence, I don't want what I thought I wanted. Those three little hanging lamps. Inside your face, the ancient manuscripts seem like rusty mirrors. You breathe, new shapes appear, and the music of a desire as widespread as spring begins to move like a great wagon. Drive slowly. Some of us walking alongside are lame. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. I love this poem. Don't go back to sleep. What's he talking about there, of course? It's like, don't let your awareness fold back into the egoic consciousness so that all you see is the inside of your own head. Keep that awareness alive, not thinking about things, but aware of them in this deeper way. So many great spots in here, you know. All studying wanders, and I lose my place when I move into this kind of expansive contemplative space. In your presence, I don't want what I thought I wanted. You know, those three little hanging lamps, which to me are just, you know, I suppose, examples of any kind of material thing that we would be after, that the egoic mind is after. You know, they're just like three little hanging lamps. They don't really mean anything, no matter how important they seem at the time and how much effort we expend in trying to get the outcomes that we desire. Spring begins, a desire as widespread as spring begins to move like a great wagon, drive slowly. Some of us walking alongside are lame. And then this next stanza, today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down a musical instrument. So what's he saying? Don't resort back to the machinations of the mind. Don't resort back to the judgment and the comparing and the contrasting. In fear, that's what we do. In fear, we want to play the contingencies. In fear, we want to go back to the certainty, want to grab onto something that's certain, that's solid. But he says, don't do that. Don't go back to the study and start reading again. Take down a musical instrument. In other words, stay in that right side of your brain, right? Stay in that expansive space, non-cognitive, non-intellectual. And then, of course, the famous two stanzas, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. We've talked about this often, where the problem with contemplation and mysticism is that we can't express what we experience there. The world is just too full to talk about. There are no words. Paul comes back from the third heaven and says, I can't express to you what was up there. I think he puts it, I'm not allowed to express what is up there, what I experienced. But the truth of the matter is there is no words that you can put that experience into. Ideas, language, and even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. I think if you take a look at Rumi, from what, 700 years ago, and then you take a look at what Rohr is saying, they're trying to say the same thing. And those of you who have moved into contemplative prayer, I think will have some familiarity with this. This should resonate with you. Any thoughts about the poem before we take it down?
It struck me when you were reading it that it's very peaceful. It's almost like a guided meditation. Instructions on how to arrive at your journey, at your destination. That's how I experienced it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love the out beyond the idea of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field, I'll meet you. I threw a graphic up in my square of that portion of the stanza.
Oh, yes. I remember that one. That's a great image. Well, I hope that gave you just another look at it, just another sense. And also to remember that this was 700 years ago in in a galaxy far, far away, right? Here is a Persian, a Sufi mystic, Muslim from the 13th century, having exactly the same experience that a Roman Catholic Franciscan in the 21st century is trying to express as well, as Thomas Merton was trying to express, as Francis of Assisi was trying to express, and of course, as Paul and Jesus and the apostles were trying to express as well, and the prophets before them. This is a common, not common in terms of commonplace, but a common human experience. For any of us who do step aside and get those precious moments outside of our egoic mind, this is the kind of experience that we all have. It's all the same, and we're all trying to express it in any way that we can. And I just wanted you to get a flavor of that and see if that connection came through for you. So there is a place that is not touched by coming and going up and down, or for or against, or totally right or wrong. It is patient with both goodness and evil, exactly as God seemingly is. Remember, we were just talking about in the last couple of weeks that in 1 John 4, John is telling us that there is no punishment in love. It does not rush to judgment or demand closure. This idea of right and wrong being the way that we make a dividing line, make judgments about things, even that falls away, because it's not about the judgment according to some standard of right and wrong that we hold in our egoic minds and try to force, like the square peg in the round hole, on every situation, but rather it's the discernment of simply being present and seeing what love requires in the moment. And so it's a whole different standard and a whole different way of approaching what we typically approach religiously through some sort of law or set of moral standards. And all of that goes away in this kind of space where we're just present. When we talked about Taba and Bisha, the Aramaic words for good and evil, which don't mean diametrically opposed standards as we typically think of in the West, but they mean unripe and ripe. This idea of a continuum that everybody is on, somewhere from immaturity to maturity, from out of harmony, out of focus, to the opposite of that. That's exactly how God seemingly is when we move into contemplative space. And we see things in a different way. It does not rush to judgment or demand closure right now. Rather, it stands vigilant and patient in the tragic gap that almost every moment offers. What's the tragic gap? Anybody know what the tragic gap is?
I have that feeling a lot. I reach that sort of state that they're describing, often like at a funeral, or if I'm visiting a sick friend, or sometimes if I visit like a battlefield, or we were just in Maui and we got on the freeway and drove past Lahaina where they had that huge fire. And I think there's just something about when you see something terrible, and yet you have this sort of feeling of weird, in the moment peace. That's kind of what or if you're listening to somebody's story and they're going into like some of the worst, gross, horrifying details of their story, I'll find myself just intensely in the present moment and then feeling a lot of peace at the same time. So that's how it manifests for me.
Okay. That's an interesting juxtaposition. But it also is speaking to the fact that, remember, that quiet space is available to us at any time. So even as he's saying, you're looking at the devastation of Lahaina and the tragedy that represents, and yet if you still are present and you go down into that space, you're going to find that quiet stillness. And so it's always available to us. And that's important because at the worst times in our life, when we need it most, yes, it's still available. Any other thoughts about the tragic gap, though?
I was connecting that back to our previous conversation about like an experience of meaninglessness.
Mm.
But I don't know if that's what he's talking about there.
It could be. Go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It's like that gap, like there's nothingness. It's nothing. It's in between moments, because then moments has that presence or that feeling, but there's just that nothingness. But I don't know why that's tragic.
Mm.
For
I
me,
was also thinking that, maybe like those death of the ego moments, like the ego might experience it as tragedy, right? Where you're disengaging from this false sense of self.
Uh-huh.
And, as he says, the Holy Spirit is vigilant and waiting there to catch you.
That's circling in closer to the idea that I got in the back.
I have an idea. So the first thing we talked about was too many suffer from a negative self-image when an entirely positive one has been given us for free. Maybe that's the gap between the negative self-image and the positive self-image. It's a tragic place right there.
Yeah.
That's
I am going to think that might be you, Sandy. Yeah, I was echoing. Yeah, we're kind of circling in closer and closer. Sarah, you were going to say something?
well, I was just, I mean, my immediate reaction was just, anytime we're not in the moment, we're like falling into the gap. And I tend to think of it the other way, like, oh, to be, that yearning to be in that present moment. But for me, it's a nice just awareness of like, it's always there. It's eternal. It's there. And when we fall out of the moment, then we tend to be in that gap a lot. I mean, that's how I interpreted it, but
Oh
but
gosh.
I like too the concept of like that's also the like the ego there too, is because then we judge ourselves for falling into the gap and
Mhm.
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 So the tragic gap actually is the gap between the way things are and the way we think they should be. So you can see how you all were kind of zeroing in on that. But the gap between the way the things are and the way we think they should be is all the space for us to really experience tragedy, misery. You know, has to do with our expectations, has to do with judging. That's why Jesus says, don't judge. What's a perfect moment? A moment when the way things are and the way they should be is exactly the same. When our experience and our expectation is exactly the same. That's a perfect moment. We can have that moment anytime we want when we drop down 30 meters below the surface, right? Because then suddenly we don't have the expectations. We don't have ideas of right doing and wrong doing. We don't have the apparatus by which we would judge all the moments. And so the experience is pure. It is what it is, right? So what is it? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Take the word should out of the equation and everything changes. Should
Mhm.
demands be done a certain way and certain expectation be met. And it's,
Yeah.
I don't know how to finish that statement. I'm having
Mhm.
William disease.
Now, obviously, some moments truly are tragic. There's something heinous going on in them, but we create that tragic gap ourselves. And we can do that to any moment, no matter how good it is.
Mm.
So come back and see what he's saying here. There is a place in you that is not touched by coming and going up or down, for or against, totally right or totally wrong. It's patient with both goodness and evil, exactly as God seemingly is. It does not rush to judgment or demand closure right now. Rather, it stands vigilant and patient in the tragic gap that almost every moment offers, because it's not making those kinds of judgments. It's not thinking about all of these various contingencies and standards and comparisons and contrastings. And then he says, could this be the essence of faith? Now he's using faith here a little differently than I typically am always trying to get you to see faith from a Hebraic perspective, which is acting. Faith is action to the Hebrew mind. So belief is an idea, faith is action, and acting as if what you say you believe is true. And then trust would be the experience that you have of trustworthiness as you move through life, acting as if. So faith is the bridge between belief and trust, if you want to take a look at it that way. Now he's saying this space that we move into that no longer judges and is allowing ourselves to experience moments exactly as they are, he's calling that the essence of faith. So I suppose it's still an action, right? An experience maybe. Do you all see this process contemplatively as the essence of faith? Or
Trust me.
are you not buying what he's selling quite yet?
I like that idea a lot, actually.
I like it even more because when you said, I'm going back, I wrote it down, perfect moment is what your experience is the same as your expectation. To me, it's like the perfect moment is just the experience, that I don't even have any expectations. Then it's just the way it is.
Mhm. That's
That's
exactly it. Yeah.
yeah, to me that's scary because I expect my daughter to do this and I wanted her to do this, but once I said, fine, I'll let it go. It'll happen. What happens will happen,
Hmm.
and that's it.
Hmm.
It's hard to get there, but every now and then I get there.
on, a,
It's
on a good day when the stars and the planets align,
yeah,
right? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and then sometimes I'll have a nice surprise, just like recently.
But if we are waiting for the stars to align so that we can have this tragic less moment, right? I mean, then we're always at the whim of circumstance. And happiness is not ever going to be found in the circumstances. It's going to be found in us bringing that attitude to the circumstances. And so, again, the kingdom comes from within. It doesn't come from without. It never, the direction of kingdom is never outside in, but the opposite. And so what we're saying is we can occupy this space anytime we want to. And even if we go into a moment with an expectation, as soon as we realize, you know, there's a tension here, there's a resistance here, you know, there's a miserableness here. Where is this coming from? If we take ourselves through that quick mental triage, internal triage, and realize, oh, there's nothing wrong with this moment. I'm bringing all this stuff in. And then we go through whatever has been our best practice of moving into contemplative space, then we can become mindful again. And all of that can go away. We can just be part of the landscape, be part of the flow of the moment. And all of that expectation moves away. So now the experience and the expectation become one and the same. You know, we can do that. We can bring ourselves back from the edges of the abyss if we want to.
I really resonate with that Rooney poem where he says, every morning we wake up and we're afraid, or to me, depressed. And then he says, just like every other day. So for me, that's kind of the baseline of, you know, Solomon said, in great knowledge, there's a great sorrow. So to me, the sorrow is kind of the baseline. But then he says, don't go read a book, go play an instrument. And when you play an instrument, you do have moments where the expectation and reality match up. Like if you know a crescendo is coming, or if you know a pause is coming, or if you know there's just going to be a certain word, you know, that's highlighted, and then you feel it happen. There's a wonderful, joyful synergy that takes place that you're not really going to get from reading, you know, what do you say, like rusty mirrors, you know, what's from the past. So I can see where Rooney's coming from with that. It matches how I feel over the course of the day.
Mm-hmm. You know, just as you were talking, John, about the experience of music in real time, it was reminding me of surfing. You know, you're kind of riding the crescendo and ride it down to the other side and then back up the other side. And you're just moving with the energy of the waves, and you're part of it, part of that energy, you know, rather than at odds with it or in some other, you know, aspect. But that just hit me as you were talking. And that's the feeling, especially when you're playing in an ensemble, you know, a group of musicians, and you're just kind of carried along by where everyone's going and the choices that they're making all around you, and you're hearing all those choices and sounds in space around you. And yeah, it's just like being carried along by the wavefront. It's an amazing experience, and it is so different than the cognitive gears turning of study and didactic learning and the way the egoic mind works. You know, it's again a stepping aside from all that and just moving forward. Unless you're thinking so hard about the music that you never get there, and that would be another problem as well.
I was going to bring up swimming for me.
There you go.
I have the mind always racing sometimes, just 24/7, and sometimes the meditation or quiet time doesn't work. But if I'm swimming, it's an active, you know, it's a way to just kind of, I guess the only time I can do it right now, but it works.
Mm-hmm. And see, for someone like Doug, who may be a little bit ADD, Doug, is that fair enough to say, man? Just a little bit? Yeah. You know, a walking meditation or getting on a treadmill or something that's repetitive, just like swimming. You know, he gets into the groove and the motion is there, and then the mind can go right into that space So a walking meditation for someone who finds it excruciating to sit for 20 minutes still in a chair can be another way to skin the cat.
Or sometimes if I'm sitting there, I have to almost use tapping or something more active with the nervous energy, but trying to wield it in and quiet it down. Maybe that's being a little sick, but that's what you got to do what you got to do. So
Yeah, do what works, and people who use those apps, that typically have, a guided meditation or affirmations or some kind of vocal track that's overlaid over music or environmental sounds, and that's what they, are used to in terms of meditation. I said, that's fine. That's a great start. But think of all of that as training wheels on the bike, and then slowly start removing them. When you're really good at doing something with a guided imagery and music or whatever, or swimming or walking or whatever it is that you're doing, when you get good at that, then start removing those training wheels and see if you can remove the voice track and then just leave the music, then remove the music and just leave the surf. And then finally see if you can back your way into silence and eventually back your way into physical stillness as well. But whether you do or don't do that, to find the interior stillness is really what we're after. So that's the main point.
I wanted to comment about when he said, don't open the door to the study, when you wake up in the morning and begin reading, take down a musical instrument. To me, I love reading. I get immersed in a book. I don't see the studying. Whereas, you mentioned like the didactic type of studying is different from just enjoying the book. You don't really study it. You just enjoy it and get immersed in that world. That's what happens to me. I can enjoy a book and finish it in one long weekend. That's enjoyable.
What we are trying to do though, Ellen, I mean, and yes, there's different ways of reading. There's devotional reading and there's reading that's immersive, as you talk about, and that's wonderful. What we're trying to do is get to a space where we're no longer processing in words. That's a different activity as soon as we start processing in words. And so we're trying to step away from all of that because there's still a cognitive mechanism going on there. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with immersive reading. There's nothing wrong with study. It's just that when we are using our minds and using study and grabbing onto the edges of words as a defense against that frightening morning, we wake up and we're frightened or we're anxious. When we're using that to try to form walls of our fortress and to hide behind, then we're cutting ourselves off from this kind of experience, this connection that we're talking about. And so we want to have a balance. We want to use our minds for the tools that they are, to process ideas and to plan for the future and do all the things we need to do. But we want to balance that with this time where we can just be, 30 meters down and in that still space. And so have a balance of those two.
I really like the idea of those, thoughts and emotions being used as tools to helps. I mean, instead of like identifying with it, so that like fear is an example. Like fear is definitely being able to see it as a tool would help me keep moving and flowing and being more of the watcher and like, okay, here it is. I see this, that it's here, and how can I use this to help propel me into that space of contemplation again. That's cool.
So when are we using our words as useful tools, and when are we using them as shields and distractions, as self-medication that is keeping us from the things that we really do need to pay attention to? And that's a judgment call. Find the balance, find the middle way through. And typically, all of us, human beings in general, but especially those of us living in the West in the 21st century, our pendulum is pretty much pegged to the noisy egoic side of life. We're on that side of the street. So we're going to need to really be working to exercise the weak hand and pull that pendulum back to center, which means we're going to have to spend a lot of intentional time just trying to be 4 S's, right? Silence, solitude, stillness, simplicity. So that's going to be something that we're going to be trying to pull back because we're so far over to the other side, just culturally. So many distractions for us these days. All right, let's see what he's got in the last couple paragraphs. God is a riverbed of mercy that underlies all the ephemeral flotsam and jetsam of your life. This riverbed is vast, silent, restful, and resourceful. It receives and also releases all the comings and goings. So there's that image of the river. A lot of times when you are talking about meditation, the image is sitting on a riverbank and watching all the flotsam and jetsam, all the bits and pieces, flowing down the stream. You notice them, but you don't try to hold on to any one of them. You don't try to grab onto it. You don't start thinking about it. You just let it flow into view and then back out of view. Just let it go on by. And you just stay and observe, but you don't react. You don't start to think about it. You don't bring your attention to a point on any one thing, which is how we kind of identify a thought, bringing all your attention to one point or a word. So God is this riverbed underneath all of that flowing. We're getting back into that 30 meters down kind of analogy. This riverbed of mercy that underlies all of that stuff, the ephemeral stuff, the stuff that is transient and temporary and comes and goes. And it's vast and silent and restful and resourceful. It releases and it receives everything, all these comings and goings. And he calls it awareness itself, as opposed to judgment or thinking. And of course, that's huge. We've talked about this a lot, that we can be aware without thinking about it. So, oh, Judy says she can't. I saw you trying to talk a couple of times. Yeah. Oh, that's too bad. So if you have a question or a point you want to make, if you put it in the chat, we'll try to read it. I know that's a pain, but oh, bummer, Judy. You're silenced. That's not fair. Anyway, this idea of awareness itself, this riverbed, as he's calling it, this bottom stillness is awareness itself, but without judging or without thinking, without comparing and contrasting, without attaching words to it. You're just aware. That means that there is no judgment, there is no expectation, right? There isn't any shoulds, as William was saying. There's no should be's. We're just experiencing what is as it comes into view and then travels across the field of vision and then exits the other side. It refuses to be pulled into the emotional and mental tugs of war that form most of human life. That's a great word picture there. Emotional and mental tugs of war. I mean, that kind of really describes what goes on in our minds most days. To look out from this untouchable silence is to live from your soul space where God dwells most generously. We're talking about liminal space there, right?
Yeah, I got a question.
Right in the center of the door and being able to be part of everything as it's flowing back and forth. Yeah, Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. This where God dwells most generously, is that when I'm in the tragic gap? Is there a connection between that? Or am I getting confused? Because that tragic gap, is that a place I want to dwell?
No. It's
No.
tragic, man. It's tragic. Do you want to deal in tragedy or dwell in tragedy?
No, I don't, but I was confused on, is it because I'm like left with, I have to come back from like this great place? And so I'm thinking, why is he calling it a tragic gap? Because it
Okay,
sounds
so
like I'm like confused. There is a place in you that is not touched by coming and going up and down. It seems like that's like my soul connected to God.
right.
But then at the end, just before he goes, rather it stands vigilant and patient in the tragic gap? And I'm like confused. Well, I'm lost on that.
Okay,
you're
so
saying, no, don't be there.
the tragic gap is what we create.
Mm,
It's the space between the way things are and the way we believe they should be, or the way we want them to be, or the way we expect them to be. You know, you go to the party and they're only serving chicken and you really wanted steak. You know, it's not the way it should be. And so the whole evening is ruined for you because it's not the way it should be. You go to church, you know, and the music is too loud or they're playing the wrong kind of songs and the pastor is mouthing off about some dumb thing that doesn't mean anything to you here. So that's not the way it should be. That's not the way it should be done. We can go down the line to every area of human experience, from politics to you know, social issues, to our experiences at work. You know, the boss isn't the way the boss should be. This company isn't run the way it should be. All of those shoulds, all of those preferences, all of those aversions are the way that we judge the moment and create the tragic gap, the gap between the way things are and the way that they should be. It's not to say that things are always the way that they should be, but even when we are experiencing difficult circumstances, we can still go down that 90 feet, those 30 meters. We can still go down and find that still space where we can just flow with what's going on, do the best we can within those circumstances, and still find good moments and connection points within them. That's where God dwells most generously. Now, God dwells generously everywhere. He's using a, you know, just a kind of an idiomatic expression here. We are going to feel God and experience God living most generously in that untouchable space that he's talking about, that silence, that soul space. When we have let go of all those preferences and aversions, let go of all the should be's, then we can really find God's presence in even the most difficult circumstances and moments. Kind of what we started out with John talking about. He's standing at Lahaina looking back at the scorched earth, and he can still find, you know, a sense of peace. Or he's at a funeral and, you know, there's real grief going on there, and he can still find a connection point. Now, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Even difficult moments can be transformed by us just stepping outside of all the expectations and judgments, aversions and preferences and all of that. Does that make more sense to you?
I had a question, Dave. When you were talking about, let's say, standing at the edge of a river and you're watching things flow by, and then at one point you're no longer maybe separate from what you see, but it seems to me there's a difference between you as the observer, and where do you lose that to just become one with that observation of the river? And is that different than just jumping in the river?
You can jump in the river if you want to, you know.
No, I know, but what I'm getting at is that if you're standing at the shore, there's a separateness between you and it. Where if you're in something completely, the river, jumping in the river or whatever it may be, wouldn't you lose yourself more in that experience? I don't know if that makes sense at all, but
well, not if you can't swim, Tony.
Well,
Can I add something to when you say, well, see, you're seeing it as a river bank. When he said river bed, I'm saying it the bed. All the stuff are above me. Maybe I don't even see it. Because the river bed maybe is just there.
Here's the point that we're trying to make. In contemplation, you're not zoning out. You are not going into a hypnotic state. This is not like road hypnosis where you suddenly realize you're 3 exits beyond where you were supposed to go, and you don't know how that time went. That's not what we're talking about. What we're actually talking about is heightened awareness. You're actually hyper aware of the things that are floating by, the sensory input, the air temperature, and maybe even firings in your brain and emotions. But what you're not doing is attaching to any one of those. You're not thinking about them. Your focus is not coming to a point on any one of them. You're not grabbing onto them or holding them back in your mind. You're not taking that snapshot and now thinking about the snapshot. You're just letting things flow by as they do. And therefore, you're truly a part of it. There is nothing that's separating you from anything that's going on, and you're aware of it all. You will be able to leave a contemplative sit with full memories of everything that went on. And yet you are still in that place of what he calls untouchable silence. You're still in that place of silent solitude and stillness. And you won't have sense that there was anything separating you from that. You know, Tony, I would say the same thing for you when you're wandering around Ghost Ranch with your camera. When is the moment that you're not thinking about f-stops anymore, and it's just this pure experience of you and what you see in the viewfinder? And it changes the whole quality of it changes, because you're part of that landscape, even if you continue to take pictures, or maybe you even forget to take a picture because you're just so caught up in what is going on.
Right.
You don't need to jump in the river, you know, you just need to be a part of the flow.
Well, I understand. I like your idea of hyper awareness. I can understand that.
Okay.
Better. Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, I was thinking that if you're standing at the side of the river, you're in that moment and you're in that space and part of that. And if you jump in the river, you're in that moment and in that space and part
Same
of
thing. Yeah.
Right. It's the same
Yes.
thing. And I wanted to come back to what the other Tony was talking about, because it sparked a thought in my head here about the problem of calling it a tragic gap. Like
Yeah.
that's a judgment, right? Like there is no tragic gap, in the sense that, you know, we can be present to an unpleasant moment, but labeling it unpleasant, right, is right up there with calling it tragic, right?
Well, that is what the tragic gap is. Like I said, we create the tragic gap because we're calling it tragic, even if we're not using that particular word, but
Right.
we create it because of our attitude toward it.
Towards it. Right.
Question.
Yeah, I think I know what it means, because there's instances in our lives, or my life, that something happens and you go, well, that's not fair. I did this already. That's not fair. So that's tragic. That yeah, that angers is, that's not fair. There's nothing I can do about it.
I can be standing in an interminable line at the DMV waiting to renew my driver's license, and I could be fuming and in all sorts of tragedy because this is not right. Why don't these guys get their act together and do this and do that? Or I can just be really looking at humanity in in a queue and watching whatever's going on, or maybe having conversations with the people in front of me and behind me, and experience it in a completely different way. It's up to us. You know, we create the tragedy. The tragedy is not inherent in the moment.
Are you saying that that's the essence of faith? That second part of the DMV story?
That's what he's saying. Yeah, to be able to move into that kind of space, that kind of pure presence and connection, he's saying, you know, or he's asking, is that the essence of faith?
And I love what you said, William. I'm feeling connected with you, not just by the color of our shirts.
Right. Well, your comment made me think of a Stephen Covey line where he said, you know, thinking that something is a problem is the problem. Right?
Great.
Like that kind of mindset.
Love it.
It also goes to me, it sounds like a lot of, I mean, if we remove expectations from the situations, that would be a perfect world, and you just honor whatever comes your way.
Right.
And it's but we're human, so we're going to have expectations, but I don't know if I would call it faith as much as I might just call it grace. The DMV line isn't moving. This is a tragic situation. I'm just going to make the best of it and roll with it. And it's just, you give yourself and the people around you a bunch of grace and you just let it flow. So
Mhm.
don't have any expectations when you go to the DMV, I guess. But it's hard to not have expectations too. You know, we have them. We're human.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Hey, Dave, I had a question.
Yeah.
Um, I'm familiar with this over the years, this meditative practice of watching things in the river. I mean, Richard Rohr's talked about it, and Cynthia, whatever her name is, um, his coworker. But I don't have the book in front of me, but I thought you were talking about grace somewhere in here, God's grace, whatever. But I think, yeah, God's grace is there if we choose to be there in that moment, doing just what we're talking about, watching things go by. And that is kind of a grace. That's God's grace, that, or maybe we're allowing ourselves to obtain that grace, or be present with that grace. Does that make any sense? Was he talking about the word grace, or did I mishear?
He didn't use the word grace. He did use the riverbed of mercy.
Okay,
But he,
mercy. Maybe it was
mercy. Mhm.
mercy. And maybe mercy is, you know, because you're doing that, you're not suffering from all the pain of dealing with your egoic mind.
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe, at least for me, because with the mind going all the time, it's rather torturous and painful. But when you can get into that state, which he's talking to, then it's being merciful to yourself, or achieving God's mercy.
Mhm. And the riverbed of mercy works in the sense that when we talk about John 4, there is no punishment in perfect love. It's all mercy. It's all grace. It's all compassion. When we get to God, that's what we get. This idea of being beyond right doing and wrongdoing, and all our ideas of morality and following the rules and the law and all of that stuff is going to just shrink down to a point of grace, a point of mercy in God's presence is basically what we're saying. And that's the experience of contemplation. And when we talk about Patricia and Brady's near-death experiences, that's what they experience, is all that stuff that we worry about and judge over. It just kind of goes away, or it shrinks down to a singularity, however you want to take a look at it. But it's very different than we normally think of in philosophical or religious theological ways. All of that stuff is kind of out the window.
The way I look at it, when they use the word tragic, what they really mean is like very interesting or very compelling, very important to focus on. But they're talking about a very tiny moment in time that becomes just intensely real, which is also why Rooney talks about this experience as waking up. And he repeats that: wake up, don't go back to sleep. He says that 3 times: don't go back to sleep. And so to me, the tragic moment is that you're not asleep, right? You're fully aware of what's happening that second.
Yeah. Well, that wouldn't be a tragic moment. That would be a non-tragic moment.
Non-tragic moment.
Yeah, the
right.
tragic moment is when we are still clouded with our thinking, and all we really see is our frustrated agenda, and we're really not seeing the moment beyond it. That is getting caught in the tragic gap. Let's read this last paragraph, or I guess 2.
Dave, can I say one quick thing?
Absolutely, dear.
My thought through this whole thing has been exactly, you have described exactly what I experienced what my consciousness experienced on the other side when I was not in my body.
That's great. Validation. But that's it. And it's not just Patricia and Brady, but it's, if you read near-death experiences, that's what they keep talking about. All of that sense of condemnation goes away, and just a sense of being enveloped, accepted. There's a connection point. And if you move into contemplative space, that's what you feel as well. Because the only thing that separates, the only thing that judges and condemns is the egoic noodle, right? That's the only part of us that does this. And yet we so identify with it and we spend so much time with it, we think that's the real fabric of reality, but it's not. It's something different. And we experience that when we step outside. Okay, last bit and then we'll be done. St. Teresa of Avila says, I myself can come up with nothing as magnificent as the beauty and amplitude of a soul. The fact that the soul is made in God's image means that it is very difficult for us to understand its sublime dignity and loveliness. Far too many humans suffer from a negative self-image when an entirely positive one has been given to them for free. Had to press the cough button there. Okay. Yeah, we're over time, but another great conversation. Thanks, everybody. If there's anything that we really didn't get to or develop very well, or any questions that are still lingering, just write them in the margins of the book. You know, notate them in some way, and at the beginning of next week, we'll jump on those as well. But we're getting this clearer and clearer dive into the experience of contemplation, I think, as we go. All right, Scotty.
Thank you, Father, for this time together and for this exploration of what's possible for us. For us taking out the should and the expectation that something needs to be one way or another for us to have the experience we think we're supposed to be having. To help us to clear out the egoic mind and expectations and should nots, and help us to just be free to enter into the experience. Not the gap, but the connection. It's available 24/7. And we just get connected with who you say we are and what you say is possible for us, and we take you up on it. Help us to take you up on it often, Lord. It's a beautiful place to hang out. We're grateful for all that you do for us. It's in your precious and holy name, Lord Jesus, that we pray, we give our thanks, and we say amen. Amen.
Amen, everyone. Thanks again. Have a great few days. We'll see you Sunday.
Thank you.
And Judy, fix your microphone for next time.
Judy.
All right, everybody. See you soon.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Well, I found a longer version of the Rumi's poem.
Oh, yeah.
It is a long. It's a long.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Very cool. All right,
Okay.
everybody. Good night.
See you on Sunday.
Good night, Georgiana. See you
Bye.
Sunday.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.